want to begin our discussion of a lesson before dying today by connecting with what I was saying about the sad racial history of the South. Remember, this is taking place in the late 1940s, around 1948. But still, what we see, and we see very clearly from the early chapters, is racially determined systems. So I want to concentrate on these three in particular: the plantation system, the justice system, and the school system, to show how each of them is racially charged. I'll be skipping around in these early chapters in order to stick to this format. I wanted to start with the plantation system because that's really the basis of everything else. The time in the history of the South when slavery took off, so to speak, became economically vital, was when a large-scale plantation system developed. Those two things go hand in hand, and it was really this economic dependency on the plantation system that led to the shaping of the legal system of the justice system. In other words, once you had this deeply entrenched economic system tied up in plantations, you had to have a legal way to protect it. And that was a lot of what was behind the eventual split between the South and the North. Well, what we can see in this book is even long after the Civil War, 80, 90 years, after World War II still, when this book is taking place, you can see the remnants of the plantation system, and that those racial relationships established through the plantation system are still shaping the other systems, particularly legal and education system that we'll talk about today. So that's why I want to start with the plantation system, even though in the book we don't really get a full glimpse of that until after the trial. The place in these early chapters where we see the plantation system most clearly are chapters 3 and 6. I want to talk about a couple of episodes there in those chapters. But before I look at some passages, let me try to describe the system as it's manifested here a little bit. Give you a little background. The neighborhood that Jefferson lives in, that the school is in, that Grant teaches in, still retains the character of the plantation system. The remnants of this older way of life still dominate economic and status relationships within this neighborhood. Just for example, the area where blacks live in this neighborhood that Jefferson is from is called what? Anybody know? It's called
Parish?
No, that the parish would be equivalent to a county, so that's the whole area where it's in. But just the little part of the old plantation where the black folk live, it's called the quarter. Okay, and so we talk about going to the quarter, or so-and-so lives in the quarter, or the school is in the quarter. Well, it's still called the quarter because in earlier days, antebellum days, before the war, these were the slave quarters. That's how the quarter gets its name. They were slave quarters. All right, so even that remnant of the name is still called the quarter, meaning it was the slave quarters in slavery days. So that's an example of the holdover. We find out in these early chapters how Miss Emma and Tonty Lou, these two black matriarchs, how they got to be such good friends. And the way they got to be such good friends was they worked in the big house together. They're basically servants in the plantation house. And so for years they have been working partners, just as now they're very close friends. We know that Grant, as he was growing up, that was his job, was to hang around, run around the plantation, gathering figs and pears and eggs that the hens had laid in the grass, helping out his Tanti Lou and the women inside. Okay, well, those are all indications that still, in the names and where people live and how they make their livelihoods, the black people who remain on the place make their living by working in the fields or working in the woods. It's still very agricultural, and it's still dominated by this big house. Everybody is economically dependent on the white guy in the big house for their livelihood. His name is they call him Mr. Ornery. Ornery Pichot is his name. Okay, and Grant knows, even though he's a teacher and he doesn't work for Mr. Ornery directly, he knows that his livelihood as well as the welfare of his school depends on the favor of Mr. Ornery, because of networks of influence. If Mr. Ornery said the wrong thing to somebody on the school board, it's perfectly obvious that Grant would lose his job. If Mr. Ornery sends word to Grant that he wants him, if he wants to see him, Grant knows that he has to go. Okay, well, there are a couple of episodes in these early chapters that show how, in the way that even Grant, who's well educated, probably better educated than Mr. Ornery, that even in his relationship with him, what Mr. Ornery expects, what the white pattern demands, is really a remnant of that old master-slave relationship that obtained in slavery times. Let me point you to a couple of passages where you can see that kind of thing going on. One's on page 21 in chapter 3. This is first time he goes to the big house, which he was very reluctant to do. And by the way, if you read, you know that the only reason he's going there at all is because his aunt and Miss Emma are making him do it. He's going to be their spokesman in a lot of ways. So he's going back reluctantly, and from the way he's treated, you can see why he hates to go. What I want you to pay attention to is a kind of unspoken code that he has to observe. It doesn't have anything to do with any law that's written out, but it has to do with this old master-slave relationship that he's still expected to operate within the parameters of. He's still supposed to obey these methods of behavior in his relationship to this white man. Okay, I'm going to start down here a couple of paragraphs on 21 with a little bit of narration. Here, Mr. Ornery is talking to Grant. He looked over her head, Miss Emma, who's standing there, he looked over her head at me, standing back by the door. I was too educated for Ornery Pichot. He had no use for me at all anymore. But just as Miss Emma had given so much of herself to that family, so had my aunt. So Ornery Pichot, who cared nothing in the world for me, tolerated me because of my aunt. And what do you plan to do? He asked me. I shook my head. I have no idea. He stared at me, and I realized that I had not answered him in the proper manner. Sir, I added. Okay, now you could easily miss that going through. It just seems so natural. The guy says to him, what do you plan to do? He answers, I have no idea. And you're thinking, okay. But he catches on. He knows that he hasn't lived by the rule. Why? Because he didn't put that sir there at the end of his statement. In other words, in his speech to this white man, he has to show subservience. He has to show that he's of a lesser status. In the way he talks and in the way he looks, he has to constantly give across signals that I know you're in charge and I'm not going to challenge you. Even in where he looks, if you skip down a little further on the page, as they come to the end of their conversation, Mr. Ornery continues to quiz him. But you didn't put her up to this? No, sir, I did not, I said. Then we're told, he was finished talking to me. Now he wanted me to look away. I lowered my eyes. When I raised my head, I saw his eyes on her again. Okay, it's kind of like you see going on with the animals, with dogs or wolves. You know, to look away, to look down, is a gesture of subservience. You know, and that's what Mr. Ornery expects of him. When I'm finished talking to you, you don't look at me anymore. You look somewhere else until I'm ready for you. So it's a status thing. It's a dominance thing, and it's a continuation of the old master-slave relationship. Same kind of thing is going on with the sheriff in chapter 6. See a good example of that on page 47. In this case, Grant has gone back to the house a second time, this time when the sheriff is in attendance at a little dinner party that Mr. Ornery is having. And Grant has been summoned to talk to the sheriff. Finally, after all the white people have eaten and had their dessert and their coffee and brandy, finally the white men come out to the kitchen to talk to Grant. I'll start here with the second paragraph on 47. The four white men split into pairs. Sam Guidry and Henri Pichot stood on one side of the table, while Louis Rougon and the fat man stood over by the dish cabinet. They had brought their drinks with them. Inez left the kitchen as soon as the white men came in. I tried to decide just how I should respond to them, whether I should act like the teacher that I was or like the nigger that I was supposed to be. I decided to wait and see how the conversation went. To show too much intelligence would have been an insult to them. To show a lack of intelligence would have been a greater insult to me. I decided to wait and see how the conversation would go. Been waiting long? Sam Guidry asked me. About 2.5 hours, sir, I said. I was supposed to say not long, and I was supposed to grin, but I didn't do either. So he's making these fine calculations. He does say the sir, to show some subservience, but he won't go all the way. He's supposed to pretend that it doesn't matter to him at all. He doesn't mind hanging around 2.5 hours for nothing. And he's supposed to grin and act happy. He doesn't do that. He replies formally. He does include the sir. The fat man glanced knowingly at Louis Rougon. Louis Rougon was looking directly at me. I could see in their faces that they had talked all this over, and Sam Guidry had already made up his mind what he was going to do. Let me stop there. You might well ask, if the sheriff has already made up his mind what he's going to do, what is the point of this conversation at all? Why didn't he just send word what his decision is? Well, the answer is that this is a kind of test for Grant. The sheriff already knows what he's going to do. He wants to see how Grant is going to react. And one of the things he's checking for is to make sure that he's not going to cause trouble, so to speak. That he's not going to challenge the system. And so he has this conversation in order to check him for uppityness, you might say, and to test him to see whether he's going to crack under this kind of pressure. All right, well, those are two ways where we can see the remnants of the plantation system spilling over to the present day in the late 1940s. I want to talk about the legal system, which isn't just, you might say that what's left of the plantation system, what we've just been talking about, it's a code of manners. It's not written down anywhere. People are just expected to know it and live by it, and there are consequences if you don't. But when we get to this one, justice, the legal system, we are talking about something that's written down, and we are talking about, you might say, official, formal relationships that do have the power of the state entirely around them. We can see how the legal system works in the way that it deals with Jefferson's case. And of course, he's on trial for murder. We know this from the first chapter. One thing we can see there in that first chapter in the trial scene is that Jim Crow is still in place. What I mean by that is those laws that dictate and actually legalize racial separation or segregation. One way that comes out in that first chapter, Miss Emma and Tonty Lou sit there very close to the front during the trial behind Jefferson. These are large women, not entirely mobile anymore, a little creaky in the joints. These two large women sit there throughout this trial. Never once do they get up to get a drink of water or go to the bathroom. Why? Well, one big reason is that the bathroom for black people is down in the basement. Okay? The bathroom facilities are racially segregated. Even these women who have a degree of respect, even from the whites, would not be allowed to use the restrooms that are set aside or the water fountains that are set aside for whites. So they just go without water or bathroom breaks during this long trial. Okay, so Jim Crow is still in place in the legal system. And of course, even more obvious and important is the kind of defense that Jefferson gets in the trial. This is a young black man on trial for his life. The jury is made up of 12 white males. He's accused of killing a white guy. So a pretty serious question there about whether he's facing a jury of his peers. The defense he gets from the attorney representing him is a passionate defense, but the basis of the defense is that this is not a man we see here in court. This is an animal, and therefore you can't convict him of doing anything that's premeditated. Let me read you that part of the lawyer's defense. This is, excuse me, in chapter 1, pages 7 and 8. And again, I apologize that this language is offensive, but it's realistic, and Ernest Gaines thinks it's important for us to hear it like it was, in language that's appropriate to the setting he's put it in. Well, let me just go through some of the 7 going over to 8, starting within the statement made by the defense attorney. And this is the guy speaking for Jefferson in court, the guy representing him. He says to the white jury, "Do you see anyone here who could plan a murder, a robbery, can plan anything? A cornered animal to strike quickly out of fear, a trait inherited from his ancestors in the deepest jungle of blackest Africa." Of course, there's the racial part. This guy is just an animal brought over here from Africa, or whose ancestors were brought over here from Africa. Not fully human is the implication there. So he can strike out of fear, yes, but can he plan? To plan, gentlemen of the jury? No, gentlemen, this skull here holds no plans. What you see here is a thing that acts on command, a thing to hold the handle of a plow, a thing to load your bales of cotton, a thing to dig your ditches, to chop your wood, to pull your corn. That is what you see here, but you do not see anything capable of planning a robbery or a murder. Okay, we'll talk about a backhanded defense. His defense is this guy can't be guilty of premeditated murder because he can't premeditate. He lacks rational capacity. He's not fully human. All right, so in the actual defense, we see very clearly racism. So we've got the the form of the law that we're used to in American justice. We have a public defender who is representing this young man who can't afford it, but his defense is so racially charged that it demeans him, calling him in effect subhuman, an animal who's not a human animal. Okay, the last system I want to talk about here briefly is the school system, education. And the best example of the state of the school system and how this education system is racially defined. Best example of that comes from the superintendent's visit of instruction. Of course, this is the arm of the state and the system that Grant is most intimately connected with. It's what he relies on for his livelihood. So he has to, of course, submit to the annual visit of the white superintendent of schools, whose name is Dr. Joseph Morgan. When the superintendent shows up to make his inspection, he's later than he was expected to be, so Grant has already had to wait. The superintendent doesn't know his name, despite the fact that this is his 6th visit. He used to call Grant Mr. Washington, and now he calls him Higgins instead of Wiggins, which Grant Riley notes is at least an improvement. It's a little closer to his real name. But I think what's most revealing is the way the superintendent treats the students, treats the children when he arrives. The scariest passage, I think, is on page 56. So let's look at that. This is the first longish paragraph on page 56. The way Dr. Joseph proceeds is he's standing in front of the whole school, and he calls up students individually from each grade and asks them questions, but also examines them. And it's this personal inspection of their bodies that is the scariest. All right, about halfway through, not quite halfway through this paragraph. And besides looking at hands, now he began inspecting teeth. Open wide, say ah. And he would have the poor children spreading their lips as far as they could while he peered into their mouths. At the university, this is Grant telling us this, I had read about slave masters who had done the same thing when buying new slaves. And I had read of cattlemen doing it when purchasing horses and cattle. At least Dr. Joseph had graduated to the level where he let the children spread out their own lips rather than using some kind of crude metal instrument. I appreciated his humanitarianism. There's a little irony there at the end, of course. All right, well, this guy, he's supposed to be in charge for the parish, for the whole geographical area. He's charged with the welfare of children, especially their education. What he's interested in with black children is their physical fitness, their hygiene, and when he examines them, he treats them, as Grant says, like they were slaves on the auction block, looking at their teeth. In his admonishments to the children, what he urges is physical fitness and obedience. Those are the two things he's most interested in. In other words, he's not at all interested in their intellectual attainments, or secondarily so. His final advice to Grant as he leaves, hurries on to his next stop, is drill them on the flag. Meaning be sure they know the Pledge of Allegiance and they go out there and show the proper courtesy to the American flag. Drill them on the flag and emphasize hygiene. Those are the two things that he wants Grant to do. So the implication of the whole thing is that the important thing about black children is that they'd be good laborers, you know, to do physical labor, and that they not cause any trouble. Okay, keep them healthy and keep them obedient is basically what the message that they're getting from the superintendent. All right. Well, what we will begin to talk about next time are some of the consequences of these systems, particularly on the self-understanding of the people who do live in the quarter. And so where we'll begin next time is with what Grant finds out on visiting his old teacher, the guy who was his teacher when he grew up in the quarter, whose name is Mr. Antoine. And I think we'll find Mr. Antoine's views are very enlightening about the effect of growing up in such an environment on the psyche of the people who have to endure it.